Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Everybody, as they load in, hopefully everybody can see on screen the COVID-19 check-in for May 1st. If for some reason you don't see that, please use the chat box and let us know, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason, and I am the Affiliate Services Coordinator for Wasik, and I want to welcome you to today's COVID-19 check-in for Friday, May 1st. Before we get started, I want to go through a few housekeeping items that you all should be familiar with. For those that wish to speak, ask a question, or make a comment, there's a raise your hand icon at the bottom of your toolbar. Everyone is automatically muted except the panelists, so if you wish to be unmuted, you'll need to raise your hand. For those that are following along with audio through a separate phone line, you'll have to press *9 on that phone. That way we know which line to unmute. If you are joining by phone, if you don't mind using the chat box and letting us know what the phone number is, that way we can assign it to your name. Again, there's the chat box. There's also a question and answer box if you prefer to ask your questions that way. On screen, everybody should be seeing the PowerPoint slide that says COVID-19 check-in for Friday, May 1st. If you have any technical issues, whether it be audio or visual, please use the chat box and let us know. Otherwise, I will pass it off to Jamie Bodden.
Great, thanks, Jason. And go ahead and advance those slides. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I can imagine a lot of you have a lot to say if you listened to the governor's press conference that just wrapped up. And so hopefully we'll have some time for some discussion and questions around what the governor presented earlier this afternoon. Again, just a reminder, the webinar is being recorded. We will get that posted to the Wasik website, and then utilize the chat feature and the Q&A feature should you have any questions. Go ahead, Jason. So today we have two guest speakers that will be presenting on some local authorities and how to leverage those local authorities and work together. Eric is going to give a Keros funding update. A lot has happened for that this past week, and I know you are all anxious about getting funding. And then we'll also reserve time for the governor's reopening plan. I do want to say I anticipate today running over an hour, so if you can stay with us for as long as you can, that is much appreciated, but I am wagering that we will be running closer to 5 today. Go ahead, Jason. So our guest speakers will be discussing local authorities such as your county board authority, local health officer authority, local board of health authority, what they are, how to utilize them, and how they can be leveraged to promote local control, and especially given the context that we're operating in. Our first presenter is Rob McKenna. He's the former Attorney General for Washington State, probably familiar to many of you. And then we'll also have Dr. Alan Melnick present. He is the Administrator and Health Officer for Clark County. And then he's also the Health Officer for a number of smaller counties in southwestern Washington, including Skamania, Wahkiakum, Cowlitz, and Pacific. So with that, Rob, I see that you're on, and if you can unmute, I will let you take it away.
Sorry
And
about that.
Rob,
Always hide they ought to leave the mute button up where you can always see it. They don't. I always have to whisk my cursor around the screen until it lights up, and then I can see it.
the frantic panic. I know it well. Take it away, Rob.
I do it every time. I don't know why, but anyway, I appreciate the invitation to be part of this program today. It's been a pleasure to work with Wasik over the years, including in the last few years, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity today. What I was asked to do is speak to an issue that's come up in recent weeks about the authority of local government versus the authority of state government, where the lines are, and what the power of a local government is when the state government has stepped in and declared a statewide emergency. So I'm going to be doing that by referencing or referring to a memorandum that is available on the MRSC website. I'm sure you're all regular users of the MRSC's resources. They're doing some great work during the current emergency declaration to put up resources on their website for you. If you're not already looking at their website, I encourage you to do that. One of the documents they post is a memorandum that my office released back in 2008 during my first term as State Attorney General. And I was rereading it to prepare for today's seminar and really struck by a paragraph in the introduction of this memo, which is dated September 30, 2008. Quote, while public health officials were already concerned about the potential for bioterrorism and the rapid spread of diseases, as greater numbers of the world's population began to travel quickly by air from one location to another, and our nation's economy became increasingly dependent upon international trade, the public health infrastructure taken for granted for so long in the United States was being minimally maintained. The events following September 11, 2001 raised public awareness of the need.
Rob?
Sorry guys, did I drop out for a moment?
You did.
Shoot.
You did.
Sorry, I'm not sure why that happened. I've got a good Wi-Fi connection here. I apologize. I was just reading a paragraph from a memorandum. Hopefully you heard me describe where you can read this memorandum for yourself, because although it dates from 2008, it's a really helpful summary of local government powers, particularly local health department powers, the State Department of Health's powers, and the governor's powers. So this memorandum is available on the MRSC website. And what I was just saying, I might have dropped off before I started quoting from it, is that the memo is sort of eerily, it's either really prescient or it's depressingly familiar. You decide. But it states in part, the events following September 11, 2001 raised public awareness of the need to prepare for a bioterrorism event or a novel disease such as SARS, particularly the imposition of quarantines. Public health officials realized the pace of their planning needed to be accelerated. Several public health events, and they mentioned anthrax, SARS, and some others, highlighted the need for a quick, decisive response and accurate communications among a variety of interested parties. So I guess you could file this under the heading of the more things change, the more they stay the same. We've been struggling with these issues for a long time in terms of our preparedness and our ability to rapidly and effectively respond to a pandemic like the one we're facing now. But it's not like we didn't see it coming. And I can say to you, at least, as a former attorney general and as a lawyer who advises clients today on the applicability of state law and local regulations in a pandemic, that I think we really do have an adequate legal framework in place to empower state and local governments to take the steps they need to take in order to address emergencies. I really feel that the legal tools are there, so it's just really a matter of understanding what they are. I also recognize that the public doesn't always know, what the powers are of government, and when they experience, an emergency declaration for the first time, particularly one that goes statewide and lasts for a period of time, it's surprising to them how much power we have given to our government officials to try to protect public health and safety by addressing the cause of the emergency. The first thing I want to note is that in our memo from 2008, there's a lot of time, a lot of space given in it to the primacy of local health authorities. I think you're all aware that, in fact, your local health authorities have a great deal of power, power that not only is laid out in statute and regulation, but powers that have been repeatedly confirmed by the state Supreme Court. We don't mess around here. When there is a bona fide emergency affecting public health, our local health officers have a great deal of power to address it. And that includes taking, fairly dramatic steps like, requiring people to remain in isolation, imposing quarantines, and the like. And I was reminded of this the day that Governor Inslee originally issued his stay home, stay healthy order. Because earlier that day, I remember hearing in the news that the Yakima County health officer had already issued a stay home order. And that reminded me that this is a power that exists at the state level. However, you also all know that in the law, that counties and cities are referred to as political subdivisions, and that counties are, as we often say, subunits of state government. That is to say, they've existed historically to carry out vital functions that the state has delegated to the county level. But as subunits of state government, of course, they're subject to the state's powers and to state lawmaking. And so when you look at the framework of state law, one of the first things that that might jump out at you is the powers of the State Department of Health and the powers of the State Secretary of Health relative to local governments. So even as local health officers, local public health officers have tremendous authority and power to protect local health, the Secretary of State is under the statute 4370-130, it says shall strictly enforce all laws for the protection of public health and the improvement of sanitary conditions in the state, and all rules, regulations, and orders of the State Board of Health. Shall enforce the public health laws of the state and the rules and regulations promulgated by the department or the Board of Health in local matters. Shall investigate outbreaks and epidemics of disease that may occur and advise local health officers as to measures to be taken. And shall have the same authority as local health officers, except that, this is interesting, except that the secretary shall not exercise such authority unless the local health officer fails or is unable to do so, or when in an emergency, the safety of the public health demands it, or by agreement with the local health officer. In other words, the state can step in, and we've seen this happen, of course, in the last couple of months, can step in and declare a statewide emergency, which effectively preempts the local declaration of emergency. And therefore, all of us who live in the state are subject to that statewide declaration, not just to a local declaration. In effect, then, when Governor Inslee issued his emergency proclamation, he was preempting Yakima and every other state by imposing a statewide stay-home order. That's a pretty significant power, obviously, and one that's not to be taken lightly, and one that is subject to checks and balances at the state level. But in my view, what this means is that when voters or taxpayers call on their local board of commissioners or county board of commissioners to lift a stay-home order, they can't do that. It's not within their power if the stay-home order is the product of a statewide declaration of emergency issued by the governor. Once the governor acts under the color of state law, that becomes the law, and all of us are obligated to follow it, even if locally we're not particularly happy about it because we might think local conditions are different. So that was a first point I wanted to make. Second point is that notwithstanding the preemption of local orders by statewide orders, local health officers obviously have a great deal of responsibility and power under the state's law. If you want to read up on local health officer powers, you want to look at RCW Title 70, in particular, Chapter 70.05. In subsection 070 of 70.05, local health officers are mandated to enforce the public health statutes of the state, rules of the State Board of Health and the Secretary of Health, and all local rules, regulations, and ordinances within their jurisdiction. They're also mandated to take such action as is necessary to maintain health and sanitation supervision over the territory within their jurisdiction, and significantly for our current circumstances, are mandated to control and prevent the spread of any dangerous, contagious, or infectious diseases that may occur within their jurisdiction. This is a power that has been challenged in its specific application from time to time. One of the most well-known cases in which a local health officer was challenged was Spokane County Health District v. Brockett back in 1992, when the state Supreme Court discussed and applied RCW 70.05.060 and .070. What had happened there is that the Spokane County Health District Board of Health had directed its health officer to implement a needle exchange program to, quote, slow the spread of AIDS and other infectious diseases among intravenous drug users and those with whom they come into contact. The prosecutor of Spokane County challenged the implementation of the needle exchange program on the grounds that it constituted an unlawful distribution of drug paraphernalia. But the Supreme Court noted that local health officials had been given a broad grant of powers by the legislature in Chapter 70.05 RCW. And it went on to note that that chapter should be liberally construed, quote, because protecting and preserving the health of its citizens from disease is an important governmental function, close quote. Powerful stuff. And I use that example of Spokane Health District v. Brockett because, of course, at that time, needle exchange programs were very controversial. And yet the court found that we had, through state law, empowered local health officers to such a significant extent that they could institute such a program to spread, to stop the spread of infectious diseases among IV drug users. Very, very telling example of the court's view of the powers granted to local health boards and local health officers to protect public health. And if you're interested in knowing more about this, again, I commend to you the 2008 memo that the AG office put out September 30, and because it goes through a list of lots of examples of the specific sort of as applied powers of local health officers and local health boards, ranging from limiting outdoor advertisement of tobacco to regulations on the installation of private sewage disposal systems, all kinds of fluoridation of water, you name it. So, this is, I guess you could say, an advantage of the broad grant of legislative authority in our current law. Local authorities have wide flexibility to tailor their activities to address the specific public health needs of the people in their jurisdictions. At the same time, the legislature maintains a lot of power itself. If they adopt a specific law on a particular health topic, which vests authority that traditionally falls within a local health jurisdiction to another entity, then that specific law will override the broad grant of authority to the local health jurisdiction. That can happen. I mention that because it's important to recall that these are all issues of state law, and it all flows out of laws adopted by the state legislature. And that in turn, and I'll close with this point, that in turn, for those concerned about checks and balances, as we all should be, is the ultimate source of checks and balances on the power that is granted to the governor, to the Secretary of Health, to local health officers. It's the power of the legislature to step in and make changes to the very statutes that provide this level of authority to those executive officers. Therefore, if hypothetically a governor in our state or any state is viewed as by a majority of the legislature as abusing the power, or if they simply decide they want to step in and exercise their own lawmaking prerogatives to, for example, limit the length of a stay-home order or affect how emergency proclamations are declared, the legislature would continue to have that power. Keeping in mind, of course, that again, under the rubric of checks and balances, they would need to have 2/3 majorities if it was necessary to override a gubernatorial veto. With that, I will stop and happy to answer questions later. I think we're going right to the next speaker, correct? And not doing Q&A now, but you let me know how you want to run it.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Much appreciated. We have a question as if you know a quick link to that memo. I think folks are very interested with that. And then we'll save the rest of questions for after Dr. Milnick.
That sounds great. I sure do. You can find it. Well, there's a couple places to find it. The quickest, and what I'll do is I'll send a link over to Wasak so you can send it out. It's on the Department of Health website, doh.wa.gov. If you search for emergency memo, you might be able to find it. The actual address is pretty long. It's /portals/1. It's pretty lengthy. But another place you can find it is, and this is probably the fastest way to locate it, would be to simply go to the MSRC website, which is where I found the link that I used. And that's at mrsc.org. mrsc.org on the home page, or go to the home page and then go to the COVID-19 resources page. On that page, which is entitled Coronavirus COVID-19 Emergency Declarations and Authority, again at mrsc.org, if you scroll down, you will find the link to the memo I'm talking about. It's under the subheading Emergency Statutes. It says the Washington State Office of the Attorney General developed a memorandum in 2008. Public health emergencies, that's the link. And by the way, this memorandum back in 2008, it was actually an update from an earlier memorandum in 2001 that the office put out under Attorney General Gregoire following 9/11. But that would probably be the quickest way to locate this paper. Just go to the mrsc.org website, go to the COVID-19 resource page, go down to emergency statutes, and you'll see the link.
Great. I have some staff folks that have sent me email.
This is Eric. I think I just posted it in the chat box. It was a 2006 memo updated in 2008.
There we go.
And I just posted a link at the DOH site in the chat.
Perfect.
As did someone else. So.
Wonderful. Thanks, Robin. And hopefully you can stay on the line for any questions, and then perhaps as we move into other discussions as well to maybe offer some insight. Dr. Milnick, I'm going to have you speak next. And as just kind of a context, Dr. Milnick has been really involved in public health ethics and using an ethics framework and making kind of big public health decisions and utilizing his responsibility and authority as health officer, and has really been recognized across the nation as using and adopting this framework. And I think given the complexity of COVID and where we're headed in terms of reopening and just the challenges that local government faces kind of as we move into these next phases, as the governor put it, I think he can have some really helpful perspective. So Dr. Milnick, go ahead and take it away.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you sound good.
Great. So I've been asked to talk about the Health Officer Authority, how it aligns with Board of Health duties and powers, about working with local boards of health, and some case examples. So, and I'm going to be speaking from basically my bias or my opinion as a local health officer. And, I have to admit that, the health officer has broad authority, and I think RCW 70.05.070 is my favorite statute of all time. But the reason for this, actually, historically, I don't know if folks knew this, but Yakima was the first county health department in the United States, and local health jurisdictions were established beginning in the 19th century because people realized that things like infectious disease could cross county and political borders. So Yakima was the first in the U.S. and the RCW 70.05.070 gives the health officer, as already mentioned, broad authority to take action to maintain health and sanitation control the spread of disease. And I think another part that's in the statute, and that's really important now, is to inform the public. But I'd really point you to 70.0.060, which talks about the powers and the authority of the local board of health, because the board of health appoints the health officer, and the health officer really works under the supervision of the board of health, which I think is a really good thing. They really do have to align in terms of how they're working together, because from my opinion, the Board of Health really represents the citizens of the jurisdiction, and the health officer does have authority, but really is accountable to the citizens ultimately. I think a couple of the other powers that the Board of Health has that's really important, especially in terms of working with health officers, is the Board of Health can pass local ordinances to protect the health of the community. I can give you a couple of examples. In Clark County several years ago, before the state statute had been passed, our Board of Health passed an ordinance banning the use of vaping in indoor spaces. And I think some other local jurisdictions, local boards of health also passed drug take-back ordinances before it became a state law. So working together between the health officer and the Board of Health, the Board of Health really can set policy and pass ordinances that protect the health of the folks in the jurisdiction. Another important role for the Board of Health is that as representing the citizens of the jurisdiction, they can also advocate for public health. And boards of health have been great in advocating for adequate funding for example, foundational public health services. And the counties themselves have provided funding through public health, both including through general fund support as well as fees. The authority, so the health officer has authority, but the health officer really carries out the authority of the Board of Health, and the health officer has an obligation to keep the Board of Health and the community informed about what's going on. I've been asked to talk about these roles in terms of both normal operations, non-emergency situations, as well as emergency response like COVID-19. And I just want to, I think we're all aware of what's going on during the emergency, but even in normal operations, the normal operations can include the use of the health officer authority. For example, requiring somebody with contagious tuberculosis to comply with directly observed therapy. Then things like having authority if there's unsafe food retail practices or if there's a foodborne outbreak, health officers have authority around that. So that occurs during even in normal operations when there's non-emergency. And I think we've all seen a situation around emergency situations. In Clark County, we declared an emergency last year around the measles outbreak. The health officer authority was used and was involved in terms of isolation of cases and quarantine in that situation as well. But I want to make a couple of points about this because there is broad authority, but I would, and I guess this is where my ethics background comes in, is that the statutes in the administrative code that we've all talked about tells the health officer what she or he can do, but the law does not tell them what they should do. So the law is specific about what the authority is, but I always work pretty closely with a county prosecuting attorney on this stuff, but it doesn't tell me what I should do in a certain situation. Health officer decisions frequently involve, as we've already discussed, the use of police power that could include restricting people's movement. So, isolation when we require cases of a communicable disease like COVID-19 to be isolated. Quarantine is when we restrict the movement of people who've been exposed to a communicable disease and we're concerned that they might develop symptoms to become contagious, and we've used quarantine in this situation. Restricting quarantine is a broad definition of where you restrict people's movement. But school exclusion, when we were excluding children from school where there were a measles outbreak because they were unvaccinated, that in itself is a form of quarantine. So we have the authority to do that. And certainly there's always, you know, when we're talking about things like this, there's always a trade-off in terms of the public health authority and the health officer's authority between individual rights and the greater good. And this came up, obviously this came up during measles, and it's coming up during the COVID-19 pandemic as well. In general, and this is where I stand on this stuff, it is best, even though we have the authority and we can do these things, it's basically best to use the least restrictive means to achieve our public health goals. So if our public health goals are to control an outbreak, we should strive to use the least restrictive means we can to achieve those goals. So it's essential to define the goals and what we're trying to do, and also identify who our stakeholders are and constituents are, because doing this work really requires partners, whether it's healthcare, schools, business, citizens themselves. For example, you know, around isolation and quarantine, around COVID-19, we certainly need people to cooperate with isolation and quarantine. And I guess somebody could say, well, maybe we should put ankle bracelets on people, require them to do certain things. Well, that's not going to be effective, because people are less likely to come forward for either testing or to talk about who their partners are if we're too coercive. So even though we have this authority, and, you know, I believe that, you know, occasionally I've had to use a health officer authority in order, voluntary compliance and voluntary support really works better. It works much better than compliance, and it ultimately, by doing it and by using the least coercive methods we can, and by working with our partners, because government can't do this alone, it ultimately builds trust. And I think, you know, in terms of the Board of Health, because the Board of Health represents the citizens and the Board of Health holds people like me accountable, I think the Board of Health plays a leadership role in doing this. I think the other thing that's come up around the health officer authority, and it may come up, hopefully it won't come up during this pandemic, but resource allocation. You might recall during the H1N1 outbreak, when vaccine became available, it was in short supply, and we had to make decisions around how to allocate vaccine and who would get it first. In this situation, and hopefully we won't get to it because we flattened the curve, we might have to make decisions around how we allocate critical care beds and ventilators. And so we've worked, you know, in Clark County, our ethics committee has actually come up with a recommendation about how we might allocate ventilators. And that was a community process. We actually got community input on that. So the bottom line, you know, if I had to think about, you know, we're talking here, is that the bottom line is we do have these authorities, both our boards of health as well as our health officers have these authorities. But at the end of the day, you know, there are trade-offs in the decisions that we have to make. We need to think about, when necessary, to use that authority, but also to work with our partners and work with our constituents and use the least restrictive methods we can to achieve our goals. And the other point I'd make about this is in situations like this, over communication is really essential. So I think that's what I was asked to talk about. I think I hope I went through it. I went through it pretty quickly and didn't take up too much time, but that's all I have to say for the moment.
Great, thanks, Alan. Much appreciated. Perhaps you can describe, as the health officer for Clark County, you've kind of had a twofer 2 years in a row, with measles last year and now COVID this year. Perhaps you can describe some of the challenges that you had, not necessarily with COVID, but maybe with measles, and how you worked with your local Board of Health in addressing some of those challenges that I know you had with the measles outbreak.
Yeah, well, thanks for bringing that up. So with the measles outbreak, we really had great support from our partners. I mean, the schools were great because a lot of this A lot of this involved, obviously we needed cooperation from the schools because that's where a lot of the cases were, and we had to deal with the issues around vaccination. I think it's actually come up during COVID-19 as well. I think that one of the biggest challenges we had to face, if I recall correctly, besides the resource challenges, with measles, we got a lot of help from the outside. There are certainly resource challenges there, but I think the biggest challenge we had around measles, and we're having with COVID-19, is the misinformation that's out there, both and including misinformation that's out in social media. And in both situations, back then as well as now, our Board of Health, our county council, was really, really incredibly helpful in getting making sure that the information got out. They also, they advocated for public health, and I think even now during the COVID-19 outbreak, we've increased the frequency of our Board of Health meetings, and those are an opportunity to inform the public about what's going on. The other thing about the Board of Health, because they represent the citizens, it really helps build trust in terms of what we're doing. So I think the biggest challenge, right now it's resources, and I think we're going to get help there, but I think one of the biggest challenges has been the communication piece. And along with that, the use of our authority.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Alan. I have a question that's come through. Why isn't there more of an emphasis on dealing with the homeless and testing them as they continue to move around and not obey social distancing and being potential hotspots? So not necessarily a health officer question in terms of health officer orders, but a health officer question as our medical experts in public health.
Well, that's a great question. So, we've had issues around testing supplies and personal protective equipment. I wish we had been doing more testing early on, but we've all suffered from that supply issue. Given the issue around supplies and as well as personal protective equipment, we actually prioritized populations that we felt were most at risk for COVID-19. So we actually prioritized long-term care facilities, homeless shelters, homeless populations, as well as other congregate settings like our jail. And in terms of the homeless population, and by the way, this is another point I want to make about working with community partners, because with the homeless population in Clark County, we prioritize them. The Vancouver Clinic, one of our partners, is helping us. We've actually, the Vancouver Clinic is actually going to provide testing for unhoused people in shelters who are symptomatic. And we work with our Department of Community Services in Clark County to identify a motel where we can provide isolation for the unhoused folks who are cases, as well as quarantine for their close contacts. And like I said, we've gotten a lot of help from the Vancouver Clinic in terms of testing this population. We're starting it this week, and if we find a significant number of positives, we will probably expand the testing, probably start looking at asymptomatic people in the shelters as well. So that's a population that we really, I think a lot of them have coexisting conditions as well. It's not the healthiest population, so we're really focusing on that as one of the priority populations that we're working with. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what we're doing.
Great. I have some more medical expertise questions for you that have come in, and then I'll turn it over to Eric for him to ask a question after. So the question is, why are there not standards for how data on COVID is being tracked? And then there's some questions around PPE for coroners, medical examiners, funeral directors, and autopsies being done in funeral homes.
Yeah, so I think that there's a problem with, so first of all, COVID-19 is a notifiable condition. I'm not sure about the specifics about this question, but it's a notifiable condition by law. And I think we're capturing in terms of the testing done, I think we're capturing the positive tests pretty well. And in terms of tests that are being done in the labs, if they're sent to a lab, they're generally, even the negative tests are captured because laboratories have a fairly automated system of reporting to local health departments as well as the state. I think there's issues around those point of care tests, those new rapid Abbott machines, for example, that are done in like doctors' offices, and they're not automated systems of reporting. So we're not capturing all the negative tests that are done there. We're certainly capturing the positive ones because providers are required to report positives to us. I think we're getting better at that. I've talked to some of the larger providers in Clark County, and they are reporting negative tests. We're also getting out a provider advisory, asking providers to report negative tests. And the state, and we're including this in a provider advisory, has put out a survey asking providers about how they're reporting tests, which include reporting positive as well as negative tests. I think there's also issues around completeness of reporting, and you know, one of the things we want to track is for example, the racial and ethnic background of cases, and we need to improve reporting there, and there's some messaging going out to providers about that as well. But I'm not sure that's answering the question, but we're trying to gather as much data as we can. I think the other point I'd make about this, because this question has come up before, you know, how are we tracking this pandemic? And one of the points I want to make is we're not just, especially early on when testing was really in short supply, we don't just use test results to track what's going on. We're looking at hospitalizations and emergency department visits for COVID-19-like illness, which I could get into. We're looking at the modeling data, and we're also looking at the percentage of tests that are positive. We do that for flu. We know that we're in flu season when 10% or more of the tests for flu are positive. We're looking at the same kind of data for COVID-19, which is the percent of specimens that test positive. So we're looking at, I just want to point out that we're looking at a lot of different data sets to understand where we are, and also to inform the public about what's happening with the pandemic in Washington State and in our jurisdictions.
Thanks, Alan. Eric, did you have a question?
Yes, thanks. I think I'm unmuted. I was going to go back to Rob McKenna, and so Rob, if you can unmute yourself. You know, I get calls virtually every day on the constitutionality of the governor's orders, and that ranges in a wide areas, from some asking about, in fact, I got one today that was suggesting that the county needed to sue on the unconstitutionality of the governor's orders. And so I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about the constitutional and statutory authorities that the governor actually does have, and how you respond to that, because I've heard you speak about it very articulately before, and was just hoping you could share a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, first of all, the governor is acting under the authority of laws promulgated by the state legislature many, many years ago. These are not new laws, nor is the concept of granting a governor or emergency powers a new concept. It's been around a long time. And as we all know, since this is also a national crisis, we've seen, I think now, every governor in the country declare a state of emergency. In fact, I believe I heard that this is the first time in America's history that every single state has declared a state of emergency at the same time, or for the same reason. So again, number one, his power is rooted in state statutes that were adopted by the state legislature a long time ago. Number two, the Constitution, grants the legislature the power to, in turn, empower the governor. Here I would say that anyone looking just at the article of the Constitution addressing executive authority would be looking too narrowly, that you would want to look at the authority granted to the legislature to empower the governor, because I think that's what's happening. So for example, the legislature adopted the Emergency Management Act, 3852 RCW. That authorizes the governor to assume, quote, direct operational control over all or any part of the emergency management functions within the state if there is a disaster beyond local control. That's a really powerful statement. It means the governor can actually commandeer the local emergency management centers as part of a statewide coordination effort. The governor can commandeer on behalf of the state local resources for response to an emergency, even personnel. So when you read that statute and it says the governor has the authority to use the services, equipment, supplies, and facilities of state and local government agencies for an emergency, it really gives you a sense of the tremendous power that has been granted to the governor. Again, it's subject to checks and balances, but those checks and balances are, number one, legislative. Number two, they're judicial, because you could go to court. But I don't think in the present situation that I've seen the governor do anything that a court would find is outside of his statutory and constitutional power. It is true that the Constitution guarantees our rights of liberty. And there are people who are really chafing at the constraints of the orders that have been issued. But it's also true, as one Supreme Court justice famously wrote, that the Constitution is not a suicide pact. And therefore, in extraordinary circumstances, we can, delegate power to an officer, whether it's the president or a governor or a local health officer, that normally wouldn't be available to that officer. And we do that because it's in the greater interest of our society to put someone in charge, if you will. So as I've been getting some calls like that as well, Eric, and I have advised that an attempt to challenge the governor's emergency proclamation, which now, no pun intended, would extend to a challenge related to the newly revised proclamation to the end of May, it wouldn't succeed. A court is going to find that the governor is operating within his legal authority, both statutory and constitutional. And then for those who don't believe me, refer back to those cases about local health officers and case after case after case where the Supreme Court has upheld the power of local health authorities to institute specific regulations to protect public health and safety.
Great, thanks for that view. I know I had heard you speak about this a while ago, and just kind of the overview of the authorities that the governor has via the Constitution and ultimately the state statute. So thanks.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Dr. Milnick. We are heavily into our webinar, and I know we have a number of other things to get to. I have one more question for you, Dr. Milnick, and perhaps this isn't the case in your area, so you don't know the answer to this, but someone is just asking why there may be autopsies are being done in funeral homes.
I'm not aware. I mean, we have a medical examiner program. I'm not aware of any of our autopsies being done in funeral homes. That's the first I've heard of it.
Okay, so maybe not a statewide issue, maybe a jurisdictional issue.
Yeah,
Right.
We're a medical examiner county, and I haven't heard that.
Okay. So we can try to get more information on that question then for you. Rob, Dr. Milnick, thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated, and feel free to stick around as we go into other topics. I'm sure as we talk about the governor's press conference, we'll have additional questions. So thank you again for being willing to give us so much of your time on Friday and this afternoon. And I know you both have other things that you want to get done before the weekend too. So much appreciated.
You bet. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob.
So Jason, let's move on to the next slide so that Eric can provide just a brief update on Keros funding. This is one of the many things that has happened over the last week and updated on the last week. So Eric, go ahead and give an update on this.
Thanks, Jamie. I think the operative word I heard was brief, as I think we are running time and we have a number of other things to go through. I just want to remind you all of where we were at within the context of this decision-making and this discussion as it relates to the state portion that came to the state of Washington from the Coronavirus Relief Fund that allocated almost $3 billion to the state of Washington and that provided for up to 45%, that's up to, did not require it, to go to local governments. Of that, which meant that was about $1.3 billion, the 5 entities above 500,000 by the act of Congress and signed into law by the president, granted $785 million of that directly to King, Pierce, Snohomish, Spokane, and City of Seattle. And that left about $542 million up to could be made available to the counties and cities under 500,000. And the state of Washington this past week did allocate $297 million to cities and counties. We've sent that information out to show how much your jurisdictions would get of that $297 million. We are very appreciative of the governor's office acknowledgement that your regional responsibilities provided additional funds to you. The minimum a county got was $250,000. And generally it averaged about $60 per capita per resident in a county, where the cities got a minimum of $25,000 or $25 per capita. So there still are additional resources that could be made available. There is no requirement that the state makes those available to us, but we will continue to work with the state of Washington. I think Scott Merriman's on the line from the Office of Financial Management, who really worked closely with us, and appreciate all that he has done to work with counties and cities in making sure these funds are getting out to us. It does appear that the governor's office is working with the concurrence, to get the concurrence of the legislature to let these funds be released. It will then be made through Department of Commerce grants. I think the decision has been made that they are going to be on a reimbursable basis, which I know is going to be more of a problem than if it was just a lump check sent to us or a transfer sent to us, but it does look like they've made the decision to make that on a reimbursable basis. More information will be forthcoming from the Department of Commerce. There's also a listing of what's eligible, and so there's a set of guidelines that the U.S. Treasury Department has set forth of what these funds can be used for. You have that information as well. If you don't have either of the document of how much your jurisdiction should receive, as well as the information associated with what is eligible, please let us know and we'll get that to you. I think it's also on our website as well. I think I'm going to stop there right now and see if there's any questions that I can answer on coronavirus relief funds. And certainly, if we don't want to do it now, you're more than welcome to send me an email or call me, text me if you would like more information on the coronavirus relief funds.
Eric, none have come through the chat. So I don't know if anybody wants to unmute themselves to ask a question. We'll give them about 10 seconds to unmute before we move on. Aha, we have a question. Is there guidance for direct assistance to businesses?
To my knowledge at this point, there's no more guidance than what is in the U.S. Treasury document. So we have been talking to others around greater guidance asking if there's other states that have put it together, and Scott Merriman, you can unmute yourself if you want to say anything as well. But at this point, we don't know of any guidance more than what's in that document. Now, the Department of Commerce, when they present the agreement to you, may have additional information, but not that I know of at this point.
And we have another comment, not necessarily a question. Does it seem right that large counties get the full allotment while smaller counties are on a reimbursable basis and only approximately 50%? So just putting that comment out.
I would make one comment. I will tell you, we were actually talking about this as a staff a little earlier today. As I hear from my peers from throughout the nation, I will tell you that we are probably the first state to actually see action by the state and the commitment by the state to actually get the resources to local government. There is still a lot of effort around what should happen with those resources in other states. And so while I hear the frustration and understand the frustration that maybe the large urban counties got their direct checks and got it directly, we have been, at this point, the governor's office has been extremely responsive of getting us these resources, and I think we still have their commitment to work on securing the rest of them as well.
Great. We have two more questions on this issue, Eric. Will the Department of Commerce send information to commissioner offices or who at the county?
I am not sure who the point of contact would be. I assume at this point it'll be the chair of the county legislative authority or the county executive, but I do not know. I will check in with OFM on that.
Okay. And then is there any guidance on how we decide on disbursement with the other jurisdictions included in the Treasury guidance? For example, school districts, EMS, hospitals, etc. Probably those special purpose districts.
Yeah, that's a great question. No, I think that is going to be one of those elements that we might be working together with you all to think about best practices, think about how other jurisdictions are doing that. I think you can begin to think about what other assets and resources do they have available to them? What are their needs? Do you need to share that with them? Those becomes ultimately the question of the county legislative authority. There is no requirement that you provide those resources to any other jurisdiction, but might be a good community conversation to have.
Great, thanks. One more question snuck in from Commissioner Price Johnson. Oh, she just says it may make sense for us to work regionally to coordinate uses. Yes, I think you all will have some tough decisions to make with that Keros funding.
I would also add one more, is how does this coordinate with your FEMA resources, or if you received any of anything associated with any other federal grant program or federal CARES relief dollars or any of your jurisdictions. I've heard people say that they would rather come to get this money because it's easier to get than having to apply for FEMA, which might be true, but then you're not leveraging the resources that could be made available to your community. So we've been looking at, is there any sort of decision type tree as well around all the funds that might be available into the community?
Great, thanks, Eric. Jason, if we can move on to the next slide for an update on the governor's reopening plan. So we hope to have more information as we get it coming soon. So what's on these next slides, I want to say I put them together this morning when I thought I had all the information, and I obviously didn't, and have been scrambling even throughout this webinar as we're getting more information. So we're constantly learning more about this, and so once we have a good grasp cusp of all of this information. We are absolutely going to make sure that we get you this information. Most likely it will be coming through the COVID email that you guys get every day. So please be tuned in for the next couple of days for emails coming through that website or through that web address. And that's our COVID news update. So for those of you that were able to see the press conference, this is just a little bit of a summary and probably a little bit redundant for those of you that weren't able to make it. This is all going to be new, but the governor did lay out a phased approach for reopening and kind of outlined 4 different levels. And I want to say that the information underneath each of these levels is not exhaustive. This is just some of the things that I was able to pull out of the press conference, as well as the table chart that he showed, and we'll have that available to send out to you as well. So level 1, stay home, stay healthy, essential businesses being open, outdoor recreation like hunting and fishing and golf, existing construction being allowed. He was clear that he may add additional modifications if data and seems to indicate that that may be safe to do so. You've heard him talk often about elective surgeries. That's one that would probably be added to this. Level 2, modified stay home, stay healthy. This would be the next level after phase 1. So it would include gatherings of less than 5 people that are outside of your household, and then some non-essential businesses. We're getting a list of what that would include, and that finalized list of what that would include for you all to look over. Level 3 would be modified stay home, stay healthy again. So this is the next level after phase 2. Gatherings of less than 50, non-essential travel would resume, and additional non-essential businesses. Again, that finalized list is forthcoming. And then level 4 would be essentially resuming a lot of normal activities, but still practicing that physical distancing. So gatherings of over 50 people. Remaining non-essential businesses opening, schools resuming, etc. So we want to get to level 4 but we want to do so, and we want to make sure that we're doing so safely. And Eric and Melanie, please feel free to jump in if I'm missing something or I skim something over that you want me to pause on, because this is all new and happening really fast. So I want to make sure that we cover everything that we need to cover. So next slide, Jason. So the criteria and the capabilities needed. And so if you looked at the press release, there were 2 graphics that the governor used. One was a table with the different phases, and then there was a number of graphics with the dials that kind of looked like a speedometer, and the low end of the dial being low risk and the high end of the dial being high risk, and kind of where we are at right now in some of those capabilities and criteria needed. So for things to potentially proceed to the next phase, they're looking at decrease in COVID cases over time, decrease in hospitalizations, decrease in deaths. They're also looking at making sure people are still adhering to social distancing guidelines, and they're utilizing modeling predictions. Some of the things that are kind of checklists or readiness and capability needed for phase movement, so that's kind of the disease activity is kind of the criteria that they're using, and then those readiness and capabilities needed. So they're looking at healthcare system readiness. Again, we want to make sure that our healthcare system is ready and prepared and can be prepared and can be utilized, so that we're not maxing out our healthcare system. We're doing widespread testing, and that is a really, really, really important one. I know Dr. Melnick probably has some comments on this slide, but testing needs to be widespread. done throughout our state, much more than it already is. Ramp up of case and contact investigations, being able to, once we are able to do such widespread testing, being able to quickly and efficiently do those contact investigations for those positive test cases, and then the ability to protect our high-risk populations like our long-term care facilities, homeless, other populations that are high risk for that. So those are kind of the big bucket areas and the dials that the governor is using to help inform his decisions to move on to the next phases. That said, it doesn't mean that every time every iteration, we're going to automatically move. I think it's more of a let's see where we're at, assess the situation. We might need to stay in a phase for more than the 3-week period he was referring to. So that 3-week period is an incubation period of 14 days of the disease, and then another week to essentially clean up the data that's coming in. So a 3-week period. So it might be that we need to stay in the phase that we're at. We might be able to move to the next phase. We might have to move back if things look bad. We absolutely don't want to move back. We want to be able to maintain or move forward, ideally move forward so we can get to phase 4. Next slide, Jason. And this is where I know you all have a lot of thoughts and questions and opinions. So the governor announced that he is allowing a county variance, so moving from phase 1 to phase 2 before a statewide moving to phase 2. And that's really important that this could happen before the rest of the state does. The local variance is intended to allow communities that are experiencing no detectable transmission to tailor physical distancing to local conditions in order to promote community wellness and economic stability. So the state has identified 10 counties as available options for this county variance. And the criteria that they've used is that there has not been a positive case in their jurisdiction in the last 3 weeks, and they have a population less than 50. This is brand new, so these counties are going to be kind of our piloters in how to set up phase 2. And we really want to see counties that are going to go for this county variance succeed. And so this is why you're seeing that population less than 50. So we're keeping it small and we're letting these counties move forward. So these counties are Lincoln, Wahkiakum, Skamania, Grays Harbor, Columbia, Garfield, Ferry, Pend Oreille, Jefferson, and Kittitas. So your county variance plan has to be approved and supported by your local health officer, your local board of health, most likely your local hospital, and your board of county commissioners. Now, I know many of you as county commissioners are your local board of health. I've put this on there twice because I think it's very important that you weigh this issue with both your local board of health hat, using those statutes that you heard Rob and Alan talk about, as well as your county commissioner hat. I think you need to have both, and you need to really discuss both. So you have 2 roles there that you really have to utilize. And then final approval is by the Secretary of Health. There is, and let me pull up my notes so that I'm in the next couple of weeks, the Department of Health and the governor will also, I think, be utilizing additional criteria for allowing potential other counties to apply for a variance. So a good example of that is Stevens County. Your last positive case, I believe, was April 16th. And so you're part of Northeast Tri-County Health District, but because of that last positive case, you're not quite in that 3-week period. But in May 7th, I believe that's next Thursday, if you don't have another positive case, you would have that 3-week period. And so you would potentially be eligible to apply for that county variance. And I know, and I'm speaking with the the district in mind, it would make sense to have kind of a 3-county plan moving forward for that variance. Other counties that I think could be, and this is me thinking this based on kind of what I've seen in terms of case counts and as well as size. Klickitat is a good possibility, Pacific, San Juan, maybe even Mason. Again, really looking at that criteria of no cases in the last 3 weeks. In the next 2 weeks, there might be other criteria as well. I think it's really important that these plans are purposeful and we're very deliberate, and to make sure that as we add potential other counties to this application for a variance, we have good data that supports that. So this variance only applies right now to phase 2. I don't know if this means that if the state goes to phase 2, will these counties be able to move to phase 3? I don't have that information. I don't think there's been decisions made at the state level for that. This is really only for phase 2. The Department of Health is working on sending out forms and templates for these plans. They're hopefully, let me pull up the email I got, and we'll forward you this information as well. That I got during this webinar. They're going to be putting together the form and documentation over the weekend that the plans will need to complete if you apply for this variance. Local health jurisdictions should have it early Monday, if not before. So look for that over the weekend to utilize that. Let me pause.
Hey, Jamie,
there.
Jamie, there's a number of questions that are starting to roll. We probably should get to them since it's almost 4:45. Commissioner Dean indicated, and it's something we actually have talked about starting last evening when we started to hear that there would be this variance in the specific counties named of coordinating a meeting, a call with the 10 counties to start to think about what they should be considering and thinking about for that waiver. So that is something that we will start to look at the variance. So we will definitely try and get to setting a meeting up for the 10 counties that are eligible for this. I know there's a lot of questions. We're happy to take what we know. The health officers in your local health jurisdictions met Wednesday night to kind of start to review some of these proposals. My gosh, I think Secretary Weisman and myself and Jamie were on the line last night again, trying to better understand. The big question continues to be is what's the trigger for when a county variance can be sought? I think that's going to still be the major issue over the next couple of weeks of how do we get additional counties to have variances beyond just no cases in the last 3 weeks, and what's the other data points and other data considerations that could be made. We certainly are trying to represent you to get you flexibility, but also recognize that even within the public health community, that there's a lot of disagreement about region by region, county by county opening. So a lot going on. Let me just say that, and I think we're trying to do our best to represent you with the state and the State Secretary of Health, as are your local health jurisdictions.
Yes, so there's questions on if there's specific language or a template. Yes, those are getting put together, and once we have those finalized, we will send those out so that you have them. So even if you're not part of that 10, I think those forms then would be very, very helpful as you start to talk about your local plans and think about local plans. And I think following a consistent format, of course, recognizing that you're going to have local nuances and local contexts that are different, but I think that'll help provide some framework for you all. I believe Secretary Weisman did contact all of your health directors to let them know that they were one of the 10 one of the 10 counties. So if they have not gotten in touch with you and their health officer, they will be over the weekend for you to start having these conversations. Even though, and I'm just throwing this out there, even though you are one of the 10 that could apply for a variance, you do not have to. And I think that's important too. If you are still concerned about, maybe you're surrounded by a number of counties that are still seeing increases of cases, and you're concerned about people coming into your county and utilizing resources and just putting your local communities at risk, you don't have to opt in. You can say, we're not going to participate. So that is an option, but you can also move forward with that variance.
As well as you could modify what phase 2 looked like. You could create an alternative view of what phase 2 could look like for consideration as well. So I think the other point I would just make is I know there's so many unanswered questions, and it's like any crisis management situation is in many regards, the state and now you, these 10 counties will get to begin building the airplane while you're also flying it. And I know that's going to be a tremendous challenge. And that's like many of the things, just like how do we spend these coronavirus dollars? You've got them and you get to have those dollars and make those decisions without a whole lot of criteria. So it's an interesting time for you all, for sure. And I think we can communicate and talk amongst each other and share best practices, and we can facilitate those discussions. We're going to do that here at Wasak.
Yeah. So Eric, let's we'll work on putting something together for those 10 counties. And I see a request from Commissioner Hughes to be part of that discussion too with San Juan, and certainly we want to include Stevens in that as well. I think, as we ramp up testing, we're going to find more positive cases. And so what are the consequences of that? I don't have the answer to that, but I know then that criteria needs to get reassessed and potentially revised based on the fact that we've just ramped up our testing. If by default we're going to find more cases, but we want to make sure that we're successful and we can continue to move through the phases. We absolutely don't want to go back on phases, and so we want to make sure that this is successful, and we want to help support you as much as possible.
Jamie,
so that's one of Yeah, let me just add on to that. I think it was Commissioner Wiesen who had the question about, we're going to have, as we increase testing, we may see more COVID-19 cases, which means it's going to be harder to receive the variants. And so that becomes the question about what's the other data indicators that we should really be looking at. And I think that's the next couple of weeks that the State Department of Health is really committed to saying, okay, what are the other indicators in a community we should be looking at? Because I think that's a full acknowledgement that we're going to have more cases potentially with more testing, but is transmission really occurring more? We're just more cognizant of it at this point. So
Eric,
it's really good points. Yeah.
Can I add something to that? So the only way we're going to be able to really control this is if we identify cases and do the contact investigations. And the only way to do that is with testing. And I think the metrics are going to have to be, and if we ignore testing, we're going to end up with sick people who end up in the hospital. So our other metrics, will be worse. So I think what we need to do is make sure that we have a robust enough contact tracing and case investigation process in place to cover the number of cases we have. But if we abandon testing or do less testing, I think it'll come back to bite us afterwards, because we'll end up with sick people, and those other metrics will not look good.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alan. Councilmember Hughes.
Yeah, hi, thank you. And I appreciate the consideration for letting some of us counties, we come out of our 3 weeks on 5/5, which is the day phase 1 comes into effect. And we have been doing first responder testing to about 300 or 400 people. So anyone who would have been in contact, including grocery store and pharmacy workers, et cetera, with people and have had 0 returns over the last week on this. So I think we would be very interested in at least having the option to pitch to the to the state health department to be phase 2. Thank you.
Thanks, council member. I know there's a number of counties that are in a similar situation, and so yes, I think this is just the start of many conversations around this. Any other questions, comments? Again, as we get materials and documents from the state on this, we'll put them together and make sure that we send them out to you all so that you have them. And I know I'll be sharing them with our local health jurisdictions as they become available as well, so that they have them. Eric, anything else to comment, to say on this? We do have a question about
sorry.
OPMA. Did OPMA get extended beyond May 4th? Do you know? I haven't heard that. And maybe Melanie, you've heard?
I haven't heard anything so far.
Okay.
But I mean, he'll have to ask for it, and then it'll take the 4 corners. We'll review it, and presumably they'll do it for the full amount of time because they only did it this time to the current expiration. So I would anticipate that they'll do it to the next expiration, but it does take a couple of days to get it out to them and then get it back.
Okay, thanks, Melanie. And I know Wasik, AWC, and a number of other organizations that are impacted by OPMA have sent letters to both the governor and the 4 corners asking for this. And I haven't heard, you know, huge opposition to it. So I am anticipating positive news, but I don't want to say yes for sure until we find out. I absolutely understand. Yeah, it's definitely impacting public records review process and a number of other work that you are all doing. So Commissioner Skoog had a comment. Let me roll back up to that. A county can have a case every 20 days and never get to the next level. I think we need to take other factors into consideration. And I bet that will be the case. This is just a starting point, and I think you'll see that with those 3-week periods, that criteria potentially shift should the criteria show us that we've been successful. But we'll see if what we have right now is kind of this plan moving forward. Let's see if there are other comments. All right. I'm not seeing anything else in the chat or question or answer for this. Let me give you guys another 10 seconds if somebody wants to unmute and ask a question or make a comment. All right, I'm not hearing any. Next slide, Jason. Are there any other final questions or issues? I don't know if Paul's on the line. We have a little bit of time left if Paul wants to give a construction update. Otherwise, I have nothing else for you guys. Paul, are you still here? Jane, are you still here?
I'm still here.
Okay. Anything to report for construction?
You know, they continue to meet with the construction roundtable. They canceled the meeting yesterday, but they did meet on Tuesday, and a lot of the discussion
Are you on a call right now?
was really around, you know, what phase 2 and phase 3 might look like. We still don't have any information on timing for folks, but we did get some anecdotal information that they are looking at new construction being roped into phase 2, which also will likely deal with medium risk construction type activities on job sites. So we're hoping to hear more next week. I'm not sure why yesterday's meeting was canceled, But hopefully we'll have some more information to look forward to next week. We did also get a chance to meet along with some folks from AWC with a representative of the governor's office on the construction roundtable today around 11:30 or so. Both Jane and I were on that call. I thought it was very productive. We just kind of, explained to her some of the issues that local governments are facing with regard to the decisions that they're making on construction and how we need a little bit of time to digest their proposals and react to them. And we could be helpful in that manner if they just gave us a little bit more information earlier in the process. Phase one was rolled out very quickly from our point of view. And I know that a lot of the members probably don't feel exactly the same way, that you were very, anxious for phase one to roll out. But between the time that it was actually presented to us with all of the information and the details, and then the time that they asked for the governor to approve it, it was essentially a matter of hours, which didn't give us much opportunity to digest it and to meet with, county commissioners and planning group members and public works folks to really understand what our questions might be and what concerns we might have. So we had a good conversation with her about that today. Hopefully we'll see some changes moving forward. That's all I have. Certainly welcome any comments from Jane.
Thanks, Paul. We have another comment or question from Wes McCart around HIPAA, and if HIPAA is going to remain waived so that we can continue to do BOH telehealth via webinar rather than in person. Melanie or Juliana, do you have anything about that? I haven't heard if that's going to be waived either.
I assume that everything that has been waived will continue to be extended because there's not that many changes happening between now and May 31st. But as to whether anything has actually happened, no, I haven't heard anything at this point. If sometimes they don't get announced, but if you go and look on the governor's website for where all the proclamations are, the updated ones are like 4 numbers and then 0.1 or 0.2 or something. And so you can see if there's new ones there, but we'll of course keep you posted as we see them.
Great, and we can perhaps add that to our list to just check in when we talk with the governor's office on Tuesday.
Sure.
Great. All right. Not seeing any other questions. I will thank you all for sticking with us for an additional half hour. I appreciate that, but I think the information that we covered today was incredibly timely and incredibly important moving forward. And I know for 10 counties, you have a lot of work to do over the weekend. And so I apologize for that, but hopefully you'll find some time to enjoy May and the sunshine that's going on as well. So with that, thank you all. Have a great weekend. Be safe and take care.
Thanks, Jamie. Nice job.